Good afternoon, everyone. I extend a very warm welcome to all of you to this final day, that is the fifth day of this virtual workshop on research paper writing in English literature and ELT. The last 4 days, as we all know, has taken us on a significant learning journey on various aspects of research writing, particularly on writing for journals and publication in the area of English literature and language. Experts from the last 4 days have shared their rich experiences and have given us inputs that has provided us important directions on making our research skills, research writing skills in particular better, and also our knowledge base better. Furthering this journey today, we have with us yet another accomplished resource person to talk to us about academic writing. We have with us Dr. Sri Kirti B.N. Sir from the Department of English, Gnana Bharati campus. Professor Sri Kirti Sir, welcome sir. On behalf of the management, principal, and all of us at the Department of English, Jain College, we extend a very warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It gives me great honor to be introducing you to today's speaker. Dr. B.N. Srikirti sir is an associate professor at the Bangalore University Gnana Bharati campus, Department of English, Bengaluru. He has completed his postgraduate degree in English from Mysore University and has finished his PhD also from University of Mysore in 2005. Sir has a rich research experience and has teaching experience of more than 2 decades beginning from 1998. He has more than 18 research publications to his credit and has authored 6 chapters in various books. He has also published a book and he has presented paper at various seminars and has been invited as a speaker and resource person to more than 15 lectures. He also has one project to his credit, and we are all indeed honored to be having you amidst us, sir. Thank you so much, and over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, madam. Very good evening, everyone, for all gathered. And it is a nice privilege to talk to you all in the context of academic activities, very specifically writing activity. And I thank to the Department of English of Jain University for considering me to deliver a lecture regarding this particular subject. And indeed, it is a very important consideration by the Department of English to get and gather the resource persons to talk about writing, which is a very particular and obvious kind of subject to be considered when it comes to the research and the research students. And therefore, I congratulate them and I really appreciate them heartfully that considering such an important issue to introduce the young researchers about writing, I believe that it would be a great help for all our young researchers to come out with a good idea of research and document them and to produce a very good research. When this particular invitation was received, and I was glad to understand also that you have set the virtual workshop in the context of writing. And indeed, it is also very important topic that they have chosen under the big title, under the broad title, like From Writing to Publishing, a workshop on research paper writing, which is the most obvious kind of consideration when it comes to the activity of research, because writing is the ultimate activity, ultimate form that one records the research and one justifies the research. And therefore, without coming out with the idea of writing, research cannot be a complete one, and research cannot be the successful one also. But the paradoxical condition of research, and very specifically in the Indian scenario, is that writing is not being taught at any level of our academic pursuits. We are always considered to read, we are always insisted, forced, and even to some extent or some greater extent, punished to read rather than writing. Therefore, writing from our childhood days is always understood or accepted unwrittenly that writing is a punishment. Writing is such a severe punishment. It's always been escaped in our academic activities. And we have provided a very short time for writing in such a way that to consider practically, or to say practically, that we study whole year to write for 3 hours, or we express all our studies and the readings of a subject studied either for a year or for a semester just for 3 hours. And this is how, in our system of education, that we have given the importance for writing activity. But writing is to be understood primarily in various contexts, from the linguistic point of view, from the academic point of view. And in all these contexts, writing is different. We write so many things, but when it comes to the academic writing, we face lots of problems. We face lots of challenges. And therefore, when specifically we come across the research writing, writing is specifically research, in research itself, we come across the problem about writing, or problem of writing. And indeed, in research, writing is a great problem. And when considered further, in writing, beginning is the greatest problem. And to escape from that kind of research writing, we always postpone writing for academic requirements or writing our research. And in order to accommodate a researcher to come out with a successful research, successful thesis, writing is being initiated, writing is being introduced in the act of publishing in journals, and writing the research articles. And these are all the initiations we have understood, or we have introduced to the research community. Therefore, writing becomes a very big problem in a general sense when it is directly introduced to write something, or directly suggested or directly informed to write something. The students with the kind of background, academic background, students are in general, the academic background we have, as I said at the beginning, we have given less importance to writing. So writing is always, as I said, when it comes to the research, a great problem. And in writing, beginning is the greatest problem. And in the context of this virtual workshop, when it's been asked to write, to speak about writing, I thought that, when providing certain kind of tips or certain kind of suggestions, which are all generally available in series of books and various kinds of books about writing, it won't be a new understanding, and it won't be a challenging one to anyone, because about writing, we come across series of books and series of suggestions, directions, methods and the technologies to write. But as a researcher, the fundamental question to write raises is why I have to write, and what is the need of writing. Because when it comes to the research, and specifically when it comes to the writing in research, there are four basic premises of writing. Generally, as everyone knows, clarity, brevity, and simplicity. Along with that, a greater idea is to be considered as a premises of writing, or the basic premises of writing, that is the humanity. Clarity, brevity, simplicity, and humanity. Because the very purpose of writing something as a research writing, it has to serve the requirement of humanity in a very big sense, in a very broad sense. Therefore, writing for humanity means, obviously it should have clarity, brevity, and simplicity, but it should serve a greater purpose to the whole humanity. When this particular idea or the basic premises of writing is considered, we have to be very specific and particular in writing. In what sense we have to be very specific and particular in writing is that we have to set a position of ourselves, or we have to posit ourselves as a subject for writing a research, for writing a research understanding. Because our very big purpose of writing is not for self-fulfillment in research, because research is basically or primarily conducted for the greater requirement of humanity rather than an individual. Under this bigger identity or the bigger ideology of writing, I thought of discussing about how a writer is a subject of writing. And in that context, I titled to speak about in this way: writing subject, the subject of academic writing. Writing subject. And the subject, the word subject has, a very big context, very big, meaning, and lots of understandings are required. And very specifically, it is very important to the students of or the researchers of English studies, because subject is a very big term and highly discussed term also in critical theory as well as English studies. Before getting into this particular writing subject, I just want to provide some basic ideas of writing. Because when the idea of writing is considered, or when the idea of writing is understood, it is found as a process of recording, or a process of a physical process where we find using hand, brain, and hand, and making pen in making letter shapes, which are so well practiced that they and between the letter movements that link them have become highly automatized. The very idea of writing, when it is said, it is very automatically thought that in an automatized manner we can write anything. But when academic writing is required, and academic writing is performed, it is not as easy as of just recording certain letter shapes and then doing something. Because children write where they don't have specific thing to write, and that itself is a very big development in the from the primary activity of the human beings. A child writing something on the wall, scribbling something on the paper, and then scratching something, that itself is writing for a child. But when it comes to a researcher, you cannot just scribble some letters or some words and say that is writing. Indeed, a researcher, if not written anything, one cannot develop as a writer. Because there is a saying, or there is, somebody has said that, uh, you may not write well every day, but you can edit a bad page. So you can't edit a blank page. Means without writing anything, researcher cannot write or show anything. It is in this idea, writing is not just something, the record of some symbols or some letters on a page, but communicating or providing a greater knowledge which one hasn't done earlier or one hasn't understood earlier. And that is where the idea of writing in research, or a researcher writing, it is in that context I thought that writing subject is the person himself, the writing. Well, when the writing process is considered academically, we find at first in macro planning, where the writer assembles set of ideas and drawing upon world knowledge, and then we establish some target readership, and we formulate the genre of writing of the text, and then we plan, we carry on the writing. And afterwards, the macro planning, we thought of organization, which is the writer provisionally organizes the ideas and thought of executing it by taking in the form of a rough note and then developing into the micro planning. That is, the writer shifts to a different level and begins to plan conceptually at sentences and paragraph level. That is the micro planning. And when it is planned at the micro level, a particular development takes place in the act of writing, in the process of writing, that is translation, where in that particular one, the propositional content that has been assembled undergoes a process of conversion from abstract to linguistic form. And that is the translation, where the ideas which are all assumed, which are all produced in the brain, are formed through the physical act of writing and then noting or producing on a paper or even on a computer with the technological assistances. And that particular act of producing physically the idea, we find execution. In the process of writing, we come across this execution. It is where the writer begins the physical process of writing. So in research, having understood this primary process of writing, when it comes to research writing, it has been immediately expected or immediately demanded by the system or by a supervisor that write an academic, write a research article, write about your research. It is expected in an automatized form that you have all acquired and well attained with the process of writing. So you can start writing immediately when it is asked, whenever it is asked to produce a writing. But to attain this condition of highly automatized condition, one has to undergo severe practices. It's not a simple thing for anyone to come out with writing very easily. I remember once, reading Balzac, where he writes, if you want to become a writer, write. It's so simple a statement, but at a very serious subject and a serious activity one has to understand. Because to say you want to become a writer, write. But what to write is always a very big question for anybody. And very specifically, when it comes to the academic writing and the beginning years of the research, where it has been said, publication of research articles. The very reason for demanding publication of research article in the research is to put in practice the researcher to the activity of writing, as well as to come across one's abilities and one deformalities in the process or in the activity of academic writing. Because the Western system has this particular kind of methodology to introduce the researchers to the writing activity. Therefore, they have, in the Western universities, they have a systematic approach to introduce writing to the researchers by asking them to publish in journals on the basis of their research subject or the interested subject. Because when they write something, they are sent to the writings are sent to the publishers, and the publishers of academic journal publishers, where academic journal publishers provide the manuscript to the editors, and the group of editors coming across the writing, finding out the problems, finding out the faults, finding out certain difficulties of the writer. They give certain clarification about the writing, where the researcher is being highly informed about one's capacities, difficulties in writing. So in this continuous act of research writing for journals as academic writing, a researcher develops a very good capacity of producing a research in a bigger manner, or a research in a lengthy manner. And that is where the researcher as a writer evolving. The researcher evolving as a writer in the process of publishing research articles for journals made him or her to consider the thesis writing in a convenient manner. There, the researcher is given a position as a writer, a position as a subject, and that is where the researcher is posited as writing subject. He or she is the subject who is writing, and that is where I place this title, writing subject. Writing subject. And in writing himself, involving himself in writing the academic journal, research, the writer is not only just writing on the studied subject or the taken up subject for the research, but the writer as a subject also writing himself or herself in the academic writing. That is where it is required a writer of research has to establish a position of himself or herself in the act of academic writing. Therefore, when it specifically comes to the act of academic writing, as I said, our academic writing, academic pursuits are much dependent on reading, which is initiated heavily over writing, or which is insisted heavily over writing. And in the uh, the reason for insisting reading over writing is, because in learning, silence is insisted much, because the very activity of our schoolings and our activity of reading are much confined to the activity of silence, because we are all being taught to be silent at schools or in the school and the school classrooms or the school education level. We're all being insisted to maintain silence. So when it comes to the higher level or at the master's level of the universities, many students won't speak. That's the problem, is because the problem is being cultivated from the schoolings itself, from the years of the schooling, where silence is insisted much than learning. So there are series of complexities a student develops in the process of academic activities when it comes when one reaches the research level. One reaches the research level. Therefore, at this point of the research level, it is always been faced the problem of writing, and series of incidents or series of anecdotes are there where the research are being faced, researcher facing the problem of writing. You must have come across the anecdotes by the other speakers and some incidents, all the examples from the supervisors where how they face the problem of writing. It's all because not the individual problem one is suffering with, but it is the collective problem of our education system where writing was never insisted seriously to consider. And at the same time, in the Indian scenario, the activity of writing, which is an intellectual activity, is not being taught systematically, uh, not being educated systematically, and therefore writing is always far away from research. And very specifically at this present generation, with this present generation in the present time, research is being metaphorically understood or metonymically displaced, that researching means Googling. If you want to become a writer, as I said, if you want to become a writer, write. Similarly, if you want to research, Google. That is the kind of status and that is the kind of understanding that we have come at this point regarding the research. And therefore, when we find the content, the information, everything in the digitalized form, our idea to write anything is being stopped in a very serious way and in an apparent way also, because everything is written. What is there for me to write would be the very fundamental question or the fear we come across in research. Everything is written, what I can write, what I can say new. And that this kind of problem is a haunting problem among the researcher, where they fail to posit themselves in the activity of writing. And this problematic condition of the research is the problem of writing subject, is the position that one possesses, that is writing subject. And very specifically, in the context of research, in connection with the research, the subject is academic writing. When the subject, the writer, is the academic writer, one should be very specific, one should be very conscious, one should be very careful. There, the problem of positing oneself in academic writing rises. One particular thing, very specifically, we come across in the English studies research. It is in connection with the thesis writing, where our research writing is much dependent on the form of narrative research, on the form of narrative research, because narrative research here aims to explore and conceptualize human experience as it is represented in textual form. And it is aiming for an in-depth exploration of the meanings people assign to their experiences. Narrative researchers work with small samples of participants like that, like taking up a text and then considering to analyze and then giving meaning to the understandings of the reading, so and so. And at the same time, this narrative research has some epistemological grounding also, where the epistemological grounding of the narrative research is on a continuum of postmodern philosophical ideas, in that there is a respect for the relativity and multiplicity of truth in regard to the human sciences, where in this kind of narrative research, considering the respect for the relativity and the multiplicity of truth, it makes anyone to be very careful in considering the activity of writing. And everything is to be narrated here. We cannot deduce an argument or a logic on the basis of an equation that we find either in chemistry or mathematics or even in physics. It's not so easy to deduce a logic or an understanding into a formulaic expression. You can't just write, a very great expression or a research Einstein did, like E is equal to mc square. In English studies, we cannot reduce, we cannot express in such a kind of simple or a short formula of a great understanding. Everything we have to consider in the narrative form, and therefore narrative research is the primary research and the research activity that we have to consider when it comes to the research in English studies. So English studies always considers writing as a powerful tool and the ultimate tool in justifying everything. Even a thesis is being produced, later on the argument or the defense is made in the context of speaking itself. But yet it is the writing, because whatever is being argued, whatever is being replied by the researcher, it is an argument, it is the statement, which could be considered as a form of writing. Therefore, even a researcher defending oneself at the viva of the PhD and the research viva, he or she has to defend orally, which is the form of writing also. So everything, until one completes the research, one continues the research after the technical fulfillment, technical completion of the research, one should go through the writing only. Because once the researcher as a subject here establishes the position of writing, writing is continuous, writing is comfortable, and writing is a confident. And writing is showing the perfectness of a researcher. As you all know, the Bacon says, writing makes the perfect man. And in this sense, when we consider the act of writing, we as a writing subject is very much significant to understand. Let me, say something about the word or the term subject here. Primarily, when it comes to the act of, idea of subject here, in a grammatical sense, it is the doer of the action in a sentence, and it is the one which is giving the complete idea in the sentence, so and so. But when it comes to the idea of subject in English studies, considering under the critical theoretical point of view, and very specifically from the post-structuralist point of view, we have to understand that subject is the examination of subjectivity from the philosophical point of view. As you know, it all starts with the idea of René Descartes, who says, I think, therefore I am, which I usually share with my researchers, of saying that, to be a researcher, I write, therefore I am. This is the position of the research writer. I write, therefore I am. This is the kind of demand the writer has to establish. This is the kind of condition that the researcher has to establish as a writer, or an existence by writing. I write, therefore I am should be the understanding of a researcher. In what sense, this particular idea, subject, is to be considered here is, there are certain, series of arguments we come across in the development of critical theories and the philosophical discourse in the Western system, where we find, after Descartes provide the idea of I think, therefore I am, establishment of the subject of thinking. The subject of thinking, I is the subject there, and thinking is the process. I think, therefore I am, that idea is being further understood in the context of Immanuel Kant's notion of a transcendental subject, where I'm not going to much discuss about transcendental subject, where it is the unity of self-consciousness and other conditions considering. But the term, using the term subject at this point, it is rather than a person or individual in describing human culture, politics, history, and society. Subject here is rather than person or individual in describing human culture, politics, history, and society. And therefore, the use of the term has different valence after linguistic turn in critical theory that occurred very specifically with the publication of Ferdinand de Saussure's studies, course in general linguistics in 1916. When Saussure, provides the subject here, the idea of subject in the on the basis of the grammar and the sentence, we find, many critical theorists began to see language not as the tool of transcendental subjects who are completely in control of their thoughts, but rather as the inherited system of arbitrary rules and conventions by which we construct reality, including the very concept of conscious human subject. Means we are formulated by language. Man is not speaking the language. Man is not using the language. Language is using the man. Because for everything, we use language. So on the basis of language, we are existing. Language has given us the position. And in that one, writing is one activity of language. And therefore, the very concept of a conscious human subject is based on this use of language. And the further ideas of subject is thus turned into a linguistic function. The subject is turned into a linguistic function, as in the subject of a sentence. That means the subject of the sentence is the doer of the sentence, is the performer of the action. Man who produces that sentence is the subject of the sentence, where the further idea of this subject, Roland Barthes puts in a way, language knows a subject, not a person. And this subject, empty outside of every enunciation which defines it, suffices to make language hold together. It is by speaking we are made as subject. And therefore, the subject here, which I am talking of, writing subject, is the researcher in the context of academic writing. Researcher is the writing subject. And by understanding the right position of the subject, one attains the necessity, one attains a position of understanding, a clarity of understanding, to know what I have to write, why I have to write, what is the need of or the necessity of writing, for whom I have to write. And these are the fundamental, ideas also when the writing course is being considered, or when the writing activity is considered. When something is considered for writing, it is considered what is the object of writing, means the content one has to write, and for what kind of reader one has to write. And these are all the ideas which initiates a position to a subject, means writer, to start writing. And that is where the writing subject is to be formulated in the activity of writing. So when the writing subject is being formulated, is being considered in a systematic and in a clear way, we understand the activity of research writing. And that is where we find writing subject, the subject of academic writing. We are the primary, as a researcher who is the writer of research ideas, is the subject of academic writing. Unless you are positioned, you are provided, you have understood as what I have to write something, the writing subject is not formulated. You cannot write the research subject also. Since that idea is the primary consideration in considering to write academic writing, one develops the idea of writing. One gets the aspects of writing. Because when it considers the aspects of writing, it includes under the scrutiny of spelling, punctuation, sentence structure, and the use of paragraph. These are the primary aspects of writing when considered writing as the primary level of activity. But further, when considered from the academic point of view, again it is to be revised, again is to be understood in an enlarged way, that the main aspect of writing, again there are three writing capacities, where writing to persuade, writing to explain, and writing to convey real or imagined experiences. This is where researcher has to emerge as writing subject, considering under the academic activity of writing, and clearly understanding the aspects of writing or the writing capacities one has to consider, that is writing to persuade, writing to explain, and writing to convey or convey real or imagined experiences. And these three types of writing are usually called argument, informative, and narrative writing. All these are to be considered, amalgamated, or systematically utilized in academic writing, where we have to consider argument and we have to provide information, and we have to develop a narrative writing. And that is where we emerge at this point with the idea of theme of our argument. We consider the writing aspect, argument, informative, and narrative writing. And in the at the point of argument, we have to consider the theme. Theme is our argument and our central idea and our subject matter. And therefore, we have to consider in the development of theme or in the idea of argument, what is the logical tools that we have to utilize, that we have to consider in the act of developing an argument in writing. So in the act of writing, the writing subject, that means the writer who is writing, has to understand clearly certain principles of logic also. Because in the act of developing the argument, in the act of developing the producing the research writing to convince, to explain, or to persuade, and to convey the real and the imagined experiences, a certain form of logic is to be utilized. And this is where we find the necessity to utilize the idea of logic. So an academic writer, as a writing subject, has to accumulate certain basic knowledge of logic also. Because research is an argument. When it comes to the research writing, we are coming out with an idea of thesis, and thesis is a form of argument. It is the justification of an argument. And when the justification of an argument is to be developed, there must be a logical sensibility. There must be a utility of logic. Therefore, a researcher has to primarily consider certain principles, certain fundamentals of logic, and accordingly, one can depend on the different forms of logic in the argument to develop the research writing. And that is where, we are all coming across the problem of writing without knowing what is to be written or how it is to be written. We have understood the subject, we have understood the concept, but yet in the act of convincing an academician and another academician, when it comes to the research writing, very specifically or primarily we are writing for the academicians, then it is to be revised and reconsidered to make it available for the common reader, to make them understand. But primarily it has to be considered for the research writing. So it is the logic which is working at the beginning when we want to put forth an argument of our research. Therefore, research writing has to be fundamentally carried on along with the logic. And writing subject, the writing person. Here, subject, when I said, I'm using in the context of the post-structuralist idea of a person, because the person is the producer of the language. So when a language is produced, and as the language is the action performed by the person is the subject there. And now this is what post-structuralist argument and placement of the idea subject. So the subject, as a writing subject, one has to be acquainted with the primary knowledge of logic. And that is the writing subject responsibility. And therefore, when it is considered further, the idea of writing here, as an academic writer, we have to have lots of ideas of research and lots of commitment to produce a research. In the activity of research, very specifically at the present time, as we are all following and very much committed in the production of knowledge, we should be very specific. We should be very careful or doubly careful. We should be doubly careful in producing something as a knowledge which should be acceptable, which should be generally acceptable. And therefore, in the act of producing the knowledge, the idea of research itself is not substantial here, where the idea of research has to be considered with another terminology which is called action research, where this particular form of research, action research, is a form of inquiry that enable practitioners everywhere to investigate and evaluate their work. Means at every level of writing, writer as a subject has to involve oneself in investigating and evaluating oneself as well as the writing, by asking question, what I am doing, what do I need to improve, how do I improve? And these are the fundamental questions when consider the activity of action research. And this action research aims to be a disciplined, systematic process, where we have to be very specific in identifying or planning the notional actions, like identify a concern, think of a possible way we have forward, and try it out, and monitoring the action by gathering information to show what is happening, and evaluating the process by establishing procedures for making judgments and about what is happening, making judgments about what is happening. So when all these processes are considered in the activity of research with this specific term of action research, the writing subject is evolving. That is, writing individual, writing person is gradually evolving. And when this activity of action research is being seriously considered, we find a kind of model is there in the activity of action research. We begin with observation, we reflect on some understanding, and we act upon our understanding, we evaluate the understanding, and we modify some knowledge and move in new direction to produce something. And that is where the idea of action research is utilized. Unless this particular idea of action research is utilized, the writing subject, a researcher who is the writing subject I am speaking of, cannot evolve as a writer in research. And this is the most fundamental problem, as I've come across with certain researchers, and indeed across the globe also, in the context of either the social sciences or the life sciences or the material sciences. The researchers are facing the problem of writing because the idea of action research is not much being advised, advocated, or considered at the research. And therefore, this action research prepares the researcher to come out with a greater idea of a writing subject. To place oneself with the idea of a subject, one has to be indulged in the activity of action research. And that particular action research makes the researcher to posit comfortably or to place oneself consistently for the act of writing without evolving the researcher as a writing subject, academic writing cannot be performed. Academic writing cannot be fulfilled. Because in the context of research, in relation to research, research is not a primary requirement for self-existence. It is a greater involvement in the production of knowledge. And we are living in the age of knowledge. We are living in the age of crisis. And for any kind of resolution of a right crisis, we have to produce the knowledge. And in producing the knowledge also, there are series of crises. For everything that we have to come out in the solution, in resolving a crisis, we have to produce the knowledge. And knowledge has to be fundamentally produced in the form of writing. Just by speaking or just by narrating cannot be resolved. It has to be produced in the form of writing. When to produce the form of writing, it should be convincing. So in convincing means the writer must have the greater capacity of all the required principles, required characteristics of writing, very specifically academic writing I'm speaking, because writing has the fictional and non-fictional kind of writings are also very abundantly available. Lots of principles and then information and influences to write. But at the same time, for writing academically also, a series of books are available. And myself have some sort of around 15 to 20 books on academic writing, where they're all coming with the same idea at the conclusion from different approaches, from different directions. But the experiences they come out, the examples they provide are all very much considerable. But they're all trying to create a position to a writer, that is the writing subject, to indulge oneself comfortably in the act of writing, in the act of research writing. So when it is considered with these kind of responsibilities of doing research and writing the research to convince, to make understand, and to produce a knowledge to the humanity, which I said at the beginning, that writing, learning, the four basic premises of writing: clarity, brevity, simplicity, and humanity. Where that idea, when it is considered in a broader sense, writing is fundamentally to be connected with the writing subject, that is mentioned in another term, author, where I connect to the idea of what Foucault says in his 1969 essay, What is an Author?, in which he discusses whether a text requires or is assigned an author. So Foucault posits that the legal system was central in the rise of the author, as an author was needed for making transgressive statements. Author is required. I am substituting for the term writing subject here. Writing subject is author. And in what sense, in what way Foucault argues or places the definition of what is an author? He says, an author as the center is constructed to establish a unified form, unified meaning from text, where it becomes a principle of rational action in writer himself. It's a principal action in the writer himself. And this particular position, what Foucault posits or it defines for the term for his question or this idea, what is an author, a researcher, as a writing subject, is directly connected to this idea of Foucault, what is an author. So the writing subject, the subject of academic writing is much connected with this greater idea of what Foucault says, what is an author? What is an author? And that understanding is very much important when considered by the researchers to writing. When considered to write in research, we are all very much and directly connected to the idea what Foucault says, what is an author. Here, the idea what Foucault provides the author is that an author is having such a great responsibility for making transgressive statements here. And in making oneself to write academically or to write the research papers, it has to be understood that what Foucault has said or argued for what is an author, and that author is the writing subject, and that is the subject of academic writing. The proper, I mean to say, or to conclude my idea, that the subject of academic writing is the proper understanding of the researcher himself or herself in the activity of research writing. Positing oneself, for what reason that I have to write, would make a researcher a good writing subject. And when the writing subject is posited comfortably, confidently, conveniently, the subject of academic writing can be dead. Any subject that the academic writing is dealing with can be easily produced. And achieving such a kind of position as a writing subject is the most important consideration that the researchers have to consider at this point. They cannot write automatically, because though human beings have the capacity of producing, the act of writing, now, as I mentioned the term automatized, research writing cannot be done automatically. It is not the position of a writer to write in an automatized position. An automatized position is considered with the growth of the child. Every child has the capacity of writing something, but when it comes to the research writing, academic writing, it is not in an automatized position. And even if it is considered or seen, I have understood that somebody writes very conveniently, very easily, comfortably, an academic article, a research article, it doesn't mean it is an automatized condition. It is being acquired by lots of practices, lots of observations, lots of action research involved in such writers to come out with the idea of, with the capacity of producing in an instantaneously or in a comfortable manner. And for all these kind of things, I suggest the young researchers gathered at this point, at this moment, to consider oneself, to posit in a proper position as a researcher, as a writer, to start writing. It is a self-understanding. It is a subjectivity, a capacity of understanding of oneself in relation to the act of writing, to the activity of writing, which produces the writing subject, which places in a right position as a writing subject, which would conveniently make any researcher to come out with the research writing. later on, those principles, those regulations, those norms of academic writing are all considered. But primarily, it is to be achieved the right position by the researcher as a writer, understanding oneself, the position of a writer, and accepting, formulating oneself as the writing subject in the act of academic writing. So the academic writing subject is not what is being considered to do research on, but the academic writing subject is the writer himself or herself, the researcher himself or herself. And this is what I thought of, sharing my understanding about the writing activity that one has to consider, one has to understand in the context of academic writing. I hope that an attempt of a small attempt of psychoanalyzing the researchers to keep them in a position of research writing, to consider their writing. If self-consciously analyzed oneself, what one research writer is or research writing is, I think my argument until this point would make them a beneficial one. So I just want to conclude with this idea by saying thank you for your time and for listening to me. Over to you, madam.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that very thought-provoking, asking some very fundamental introspective questions about being a researcher, and asking some really significant question about oneself and positioning oneself as a researcher and as a writer in this context. I'm sure there are many questions that people want to ask. This is the time for question answers. I request everybody to kindly type your questions in the chat box, or your comments, your thoughts about what sir just spoke. Could you please do that? Sir, we'll just wait for a couple of minutes for people to type in their questions.
Okay. Let them.
Yeah. Any questions? Please do type your questions in the chat box, please. Sir, I have a question. Can I ask? Sir, I would like to ask a question.
Yeah.
You were talking about writing as something as logical and also something as a transgressive thing, where he brought in Foucault, where he talks about asking such transgressive questions also. But I think writing is essentially also a creative process of discovering certain things about oneself. I mean, isn't it also equally a very creative process? What do you have to say for that?
So the idea of creative writing, when it is considered, it is not to be equated or assumed that it is something inborn ability, but it is the capacity of an individual to understand so many things in a very comprehensive manner, which makes one to comfortably come out with form of writing. For example, in considering creative writing, poetry as a creative writing, it's not simply an expression coming out of one's mind, but it is the reaction of the experiences, the total sum experiences that one comes across, would make to come out with certain logical ability, logical argument, or the structure in producing the poetry.
Yeah.
So creative writing is also indulged
No, no, sir.
Oh,
No, I don't mean creative writing. I mean, what I mean is in academic, the academic writing can also be creative, is what I'm saying. I'm
yeah,
not.
yeah. That's what I'm connecting that, in academic writing also, creative writing has to come with the certain saturation of our understandings. When the understanding is, reached to a certain saturation level, it becomes a creative writing, where in the creative writing you are convincing some truth, you are transforming some knowledge, you are producing some experience.
Yes, sir. Yeah,
Hmm?
yeah. Sure, sure.
So
I understand.
it is true. In research, it is a creative writing.
It is a creative work.
It is a creative writing where you are providing a new knowledge, but when it is coming under, certain restrictions, a certain uh, model of, research writing, then, the problem raises, because we have to follow certain principles of what the university prescribes, the
Yes,
regulations of writing. And that is where the connection of oneself with the principles of a system,
yeah.
that makes, that hinders us to be a creative writer. Research is also a creative writing. That is where, because we are writing something out of certain saturation of experiences and the knowledge.
Yes, sir. Yes.
It is.
So there are two questions that I see has come up. One is, could you throw some light on paraphrasing in the view of plagiarism? That's the first question. The second one is translation writing and its publication also considered as academic writing as part of research program? That's another question. So the one is about plagiarism, paraphrasing, and plagiarism. The second one is translation writing and its publication also considered as academic writing as part of research program. These are the two questions that are posed here.
Uh, and these two things are, very much connected with the principles of this academic writing or research writing. I can see the questions, raised here or, asked here. And this is where the problem of writing exists. I'm not going to clarify, whether the paraphrasing is plagiarism or translation is an academic writing or so. But where do you posit yourself in writing such? Like, something is asked, paraphrasing in view of plagiarism. Yes, when you consider paraphrasing something, there are certain principles of acknowledging those considerations. And that is where you have to posit yourself as a writer. The research writing demands that research position. Yes, I am paraphrasing something, but I am acknowledging at the same time in the certain logical form to say that this is the paraphrased content of some writer, some content, or some, subject. The way you present the paraphrasing is itself resolving the complaint of plagiarism. So that is where you are to posit yourself as a research subject, as a writing subject, in which you have to follow certain principles, where for the human science, for the social sciences, MLA handbook is followed to follow certain principles of research writing and all, where, when we posit ourselves with the clear understanding of what does research writing mean, what does it demand, and how to avoid those restrictions, or how to follow those principles, then you are placed at a right position. Okay, that's where we find positing ourselves. Indeed, one need not to ask these questions also, because it's all been understood. It's all been informed in our academic and the research writing. And that is where I insist my research students also to go through MLA handbook to posit themselves by not getting tempted in the act of plagiarism or getting influenced to paraphrasing, because MLA handbook is not is a kind of a psychoanalyst there. It posits you a right position to think of research writing, to think of academic writing. By understanding the principles, by understanding the conditions, we are placed in the right position of writing. Following the rules and following principles itself is not the sole responsibility of a researcher. Positing oneself, maintaining oneself to have a comfortable ability and the capacity with confidence to write is the achievement of a research writer, is the achievement of the writing subject.
Yeah. So another question, there are the earlier one, translation writing and its publication, also as academic writing. And there's one more question, let me read that. Academic writing is a very logical and one writing logical one, and writing is human. Does the emotions of humans play a role in academic writing? This is asked by Tushara.
Yeah, obviously, academic writing, when we consider the argument, argument is an ability of psychology in accepting, in providing certain experience and understanding. When well, in providing certain experience and understanding, it has to go through with certain emotional abilities, and it has to impart certain emotional experiences also. So academic writing also, to be understood emotionally. You can't, because when it is said, now that's very, very natural, very general, generally expressed anecdote or generally used anecdote in connection with Einstein's theory of relativity, where some layman asked him, that what is your, what is that great thing that you have discovered? What is that invented, that relativity theory? And it is said that Einstein wanted to convince for that layman in a very comfortable manner that relativity theory is that when you keep your hand on a young woman, and then that is the way you feel something. He relates in this way, and the man reacted that oh, is it the only thing that you have invented as relativity theory? It depends on it, according to the reader, according to the requirement. The language has to be logically produced to make understand the knowledge, to produce the knowledge in the reader. So in the act of realizing or making understand the knowledge in the reader, obviously we have to use the words logic, which are all emotionally connected. For example, in considering considering to describe a character in a novel, and to make feel the reader how particular and seriously the novelist has created the character, we accordingly use the words to emotionally understand the character also. So there is significant use of emotions in academic writing, but one pitfall for researchers which is to be avoided is that use of general adjectives. Adjectives are really the what is to be said, like they are the enemies of research writing. Adjectives are enemies of research writing, because adjectives describe, but it won't convince so easily. It requires an understanding is to be logically developed. For example, you can't just say it is a fearful character. Heathcliff is a fearful character created by the novelist. But if it is logically argued to say in what are all the activities that the character Heathcliff is being picturized, then finally you can conclude of saying or imparting the idea it is really a fearful character. And this is how we have to use not directly the adjectives, but in the logical manner to impart the adjective in the reader about any idea, any knowledge, or anything to understand. Hope I clarified some of the requirements.
Sir, there is one more question. Mr. Srinivas is asking, sir, would you tell how to improve sentence structure for thesis writing? And I would also request you to kindly respond to the earlier question on translation and publication as part of academic research writing. You could throw some light on that as well.
Yeah, when it is considered translation, obviously, translation is an academic writing. From my personal opinion, because any knowledge provided in a particular language is not accessible to everyone. And at the same time, in the primary form of writing, it is not accessible or easily understanding to everyone. So translating either into another language or translating into the simplest form within the language is to be considered academic writing, because an academician is not just one, who wants to, who is confined to a classroom, who is confined to a department or a university. An academician is open to the general public, also open to the world. And that's what, I said at the beginning, that, research writing is clarity, simplicity, along with the humanity also. So our writing is connected to the humanity, whole idea of humanity itself. So when we are considering translating something, as I said, into another language or in the same language with the simplified expression, yes, translation is an academic writing. But translating creative writings or literary genres is another form of academic ability, but can't be categorized directly under academic writing. Translation of genres, translation of literary forms. That is to be distinguished and carefully observed.
Okay, so sir, one more question. Sir, does academic writing go hand in hand with the technical writing, or is it a replica of newspaper language?
So technical writing is one form of writing which is now evolving in the context of the materialistic indulgence and incorporate and impart the materialist knowledge about the newly produced goods or the materials. So technical writing is acquired or studied under the academics or through the academics. So technical, when the knowledge of technical writing is acquired, then the required services of technical writing is of a different sector. And that is where technical writing cannot be, directly or cannot be equivalently considered with the academic writing, I believe, because technical writing, as you know, is completely different to the different kind of reader community. So academic writing, under the academic writing category, technical writing is learned technical writing is being systematically understood. And the usage of that technical writing is of a different area. So I don't think that technical writing is academic writing, and it goes hand in hand. It's a completely different ability because the reader is completely a different reader. And it is also saying, is it a replica of a newspaper language? I mean, technical writing. No, it's not. It's not the replica of newspaper language. It has certain technical aspects also to maintain in a systematic way. So technical writing cannot be a replica of newspaper language. Newspaper language deals with all the kinds of, newspaper deals with all the kinds of subjects with a certain limitation of the language and the usage. But technical writing is specified with the specific category and the specific reason.
Okay, thank you, sir, for that. And someone has asked about the YouTube link for this session. You can log into YouTube where you can search for Jain College Vasavi campus. All the sessions that we've had for these 5 days are available there. You can have a look there. And many of them have also thanked you for a wonderful session. And I don't see any other questions. Are there any other questions? Please do post. Otherwise, I think we can wind up the session. Are there any more questions? Okay, I think we can wind up the session for today. Thank you, sir. Thank you for this session. I think your session really raised some very important, crucial questions as a researcher and as a writer of positioning oneself as a researcher and a writer. Why do I write? What is the need for writing? Who am I writing for? And also the subjectivity of the writing itself needs to be examined very closely before making any simplistic or mechanical assumptions about being a researcher or as a research writer. I think it was a very thought-provoking session, kind of in a way found up all the things that we were discussing came to one flashpoint where we need to really go to the very basics and examine ourselves about these very important questions as a researcher and as a writer. I thank you on behalf of the Department of English, Jain College, as well as our principal and our management for giving time for us and really giving this thought-provoking session with us and creating a discussion in our minds. Thank you so much, sir. We are really grateful.
Thank you, madam, from my side to the Department of English of Jain University, Jain Group of Institutions, and for all the faculty members, and providing me this opportunity to share some of few understandings of writing as a researcher, and hope my discussions and my ideas would be considered and reaching the listeners, and particularly the research listeners, which would make them to have a comfortable act of research writing. Thank you once again for everything.
Okay. Now I hand over the mic to Akhila ma'am. Ma'am, please take over.
Thank you, Usha ma'am and Sri Kirti sir for that wonderful session. I would now like to say a few words about all the 5 days of the workshop that we have conducted. The IQAC, in association with the Department of English, organized a national level 5-day virtual workshop titled From Writing to Publication, a workshop on research paper writing in English literature and ELT. It was from 17th January 2022 to 21st January 2022. The sessions began at 4 p.m. and according to the discussions, it extended till 6 in the evening. I would like to make a note of that all these 5 days were a very wonderful session as well, a productive discussion. The chief patrons of the college and Jain group of institution being Dr. Chainraj Roychand, founder chairman, Shri Ravindra Bhandari ji, Vice President, Jain Group of Institutions. The patrons, Dr. N. Sundar Rajan, Pro Vice Chancellor, and Ishwaran Iyer, Pro Chancellor, and Dr. Ishwaran Iyer, Pro Vice Chancellor of Jain deemed to be university, have been guiding us on these academic endeavors. About the workshop, the Department of English, Varsity Campus, when we thought of organizing a workshop, we had thought of making it useful to everybody as a workshop than just the webinar. And the need of the hour was research paper writing, and that too with the beginners. The workshop aimed to guide academicians, researchers, and students to understand various requirements and processes involved in research paper writing in English. The workshop intended to discuss the important aspects of research literacy and skills to write scholarly articles and publishing them in relevant journals. The workshop intended to help the researchers to be aware of various aspects involved in shaping ideas into a paper and provide helpful tips and guidelines for academic writing and publishing. The objectives of the workshop were to provide an overview of important areas of academic writing in English literature and ELT today, to understand the basic skills and processes involved in research paper writing and publication, to provide guidelines on how to source suitable journal for publication for the research work, to understand importance of review of literature, articulation of core research ideas and analysis, to highlight the importance of addressing the issue of plagiarism. With this view, when we designed the workshop, we had to source the resource persons who could actually deliver an expertise in all these areas. So our workshop began with the introductory note of our beloved principal, Dr. Naveen Kumar CM, who actually has been a guiding force in organizing all the academic endeavors of the college, addressing a welcome note. And the day 1, 17th January 2022, Monday, the speaker being Dr. Venkatesh P, Associate Professor, Maharaja College, University of Mysore, spoke on the topic Review of Literature in English Research. Day 2, 18th January 2022, Tuesday, the speaker, Dr. Rajendra Chenni, Director, Manasa Center for Cultural Studies, Shimoga, spoke on the topic Exploring Possibilities of Interdisciplinary Research, and where the research can be taken up in many disciplines as well. Day 3, 19th January 2022, Wednesday, the speaker was Dr. Swaralipi Nandi, Assistant Professor and Head of the Department, Loyola Academy, Degree and PG College, Hyderabad. And she spoke on the publishing process, writing and red flags in literature research, that is the do's and don'ts, and she almost like handpicked the journals and the websites where we need not actually even approach them about the fakeness of all of it. And then it was on day 4, 20th January 2022, Thursday. The speaker was Mr. Shivaram Shivasubramaniam, Principal, Compliance BHP Bengaluru, who spoke on the topic My Experiments with Research Publications, Soaring and Soaring Experiences, who shared his experiences of writing, the hardships and the convenience of research writing and publishing them. And day 5, 21st January 2022, Friday, that is today, we had a very informative session from Dr. Shri Kirti BN, Associate Professor, Department of English, Bangalore University, Gnana Bharati campus, on the topic writing subject, the subject of academic writing, and how to posit the research paper and the subjective writing and the other aspects involved in it. And Professor Usha BN, Professor Katyayani have actually taken the sessions along. And a special mention to Professor Katyayani, our colleague who actually sourced, resourced, and coordinated the wonderful knowledge of all these persons that I mentioned today. Big thanks to her. I would like to express my gratitude to the esteemed resource persons who actually had agreed to spend some time with the novice and the research scholars and the academicians to share their knowledge with us. I wholeheartedly thank the chief patrons, Dr. Chandraj Roychand, Ravindra Bhandari ji, the patrons, Sundar Rajan sir, and Ishwaran Iyer sir, and our principal, Dr. Naveen Kumar sir. I extend my gratitude to the technical support extended to us by our colleagues, Dr. MP Saravanan and Shruti ma'am, the student volunteers, Sherwin and Kanishk, for making possible this beautiful brochure and the certificates which will be followed for the issuing, and all the other technical details and the back-end work. I thank those people. And I also thank Katyayani ma'am and Usha ma'am, who have taken this journey of 5 days along, and they have a very big hand in organizing and conducting this webinar for 5 days. That is the workshop for 5 days. Thank you so much. And also the college and the management, that is Jain Group of Institutions and Jain College, VV Puram Vasavi campus, for providing us this wonderful opportunity to engage in all these deliberations for this 5-day long. And I hope this long deliberations will take us a long way in our research endeavors, and all of us would take something back home very useful, which we can implement and make our research interest keep going and rekindle the fire of research in all of us. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, participants. And I would extend a very big thank you to the participants who have made this 5-day virtual workshop very successful by their enthusiastic and active participation. Thank you all.